Hey guys, it's Margaret Catherine, aka Meg, and this video is about 4 weird stories from my life in the arts. So these are totally unrelated stories, but I'm still going to tell them in chronological order. So this first story is from my first season being in a professional modern dance company, and it was actually my very, very first show with the company. And I was backstage with some of the other dancers. We were preparing for a very, very athletic piece, modern dance or contemporary dance. Can kind of, 1 minute it's like ballet, and the next minute it's like roller derby. So I'm excited to go on stage, and I see 3 returning dancers all backstage, all using inhalers. Now, these are people who I haven't heard anything about needing to use inhalers. There was one dancer in the company who I don't think she was dancing that day, and she actually had breathing issues and needed to use an inhaler sometimes. And I was like, what the hell is going to happen out there? I was like, we are apparently going to totally throw down. One of the dancers who was using the inhaler was a principal dancer before I was a principal dancer, so I was especially like, she's using an inhaler? Is that the whole story? One summer, I was in a bunch of shows that were unrelated to the dance company I was in, and these shows were in a totally different state than the company was in residence, in a different state than where I was from. But my parents were planning on driving to just come see a show, and then schedule wise, they just had to turn around and go back. So they were planning on coming, they were making their plans, and I got a phone call from my mom, and she said, I was just reading about the show online, and I was just wondering if you're naked in the show. Because if you're naked in the show, your dad definitely isn't going to want to see it. And I might still want to see it, but I'm not sure. And we were wondering if you're going to be naked. And I was like, what? What the hell? And what happened was the director had to submit information about the performance way in advance before I even knew what the show would be consisting of. So he just gave it the most adult rating of NC-17. So when people looked it up online, it was like maybe nudity, adult language, adult themes. And I was like, no, I'm not naked in this. Like I said, this story sounds really quaint now in 2025, but it was actually like kind of a big deal back then. I am still confused by this next story. So I was traveling to a city out of state to do a reading, and it was only like 4 hours away. So I went on a morning bus, and I was going to stay at a friend's that night. And so I put my luggage under the bus. I had a little red suitcase. And when it came time for my stop, my suitcase wasn't where it had been. And so the driver was like, well, we'll check on the other side of the bus. And she pulled out this little red suitcase that wasn't mine. And I was like, well, this one isn't mine. She was like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And I opened it, and it was just a bunch of old t-shirts. I guess the guys at the last stop took your suitcase. And I was like, well, I'm going to need it back. So I found out who it was who took my suitcase, and I started calling them. And I was in this bus terminal, and I was calling them on my cell phone, and they were not answering. Not answering and not answering. Finally, I called and said, I'm going to call the police and report this, and then I'll call you back again. And then when I called again and left a message. I said, I've left the information with the police and they're looking into this and speaking with the bus company. And then I get a call from the bus company, even though I'm in the terminal, saying, "Oh, they're coming back. They're on their way back." And this had been after like hours of calling already, and I had filled out forms about the cost of what had been stolen from me, and we were told different places we were supposed to go pick it up. I was with a friend and we were driving back and forth between two bus stops. And then we finally found out which one they were going to bring it to. It was so weird because they brought it, these two young guys, and I opened my suitcase to make sure everything was there. And everything had been moved around in sort of a gross way. Like, my underwear was all over the place. Everything had been unfolded and obviously, like, inspected. And I was like, okay, it basically looks like that. I think this is everything. So I just wanted to get out of there. And so my friend and I went and got a drink. And it was such a needed drink. It was like the most relaxing drink of my life. And so, and then I was like, oh, I still have to do this reading, right? So I go to my friend's house to get ready for the reading, and I figure out what I'm going to wear, and then I'm getting out copies of my first book out of my suitcase. My first book was out at that point, and I had brought copies to sell at the reading. I brought copies to sell at the reading, and I start counting up the books. And, you know, obviously I know exactly how many books I'm going to be bringing to an event, you know, and keeping track of that. And they had taken copies of the book, 2 copies of my first poetry collection. So I don't know if that's what they thought they could get away with stealing. I was told by the bus company that in the future I could always carry on my luggage. This last story is about when I was writer in residence in a southern state. So that morning I had been in a car, on a plane, on another plane, and then I was in a car again. So I had been picked up by people from the library group. They were both sitting in the front. Most of the people in the library group were around retirement age. And the driver obviously was in the front, and then the other woman from the library group wanted to sit in the front as well, and she told me that she had bad car sickness. So I only had like 10 more minutes to go out of a full day of travel. So I hadn't been nauseous all day, but then when there were about 10 minutes left in this car ride, I started to feel really nauseous, and I had taken Dramamine. So I pulled a plastic bag out of my purse. I always carry them. And in the back seat, I threw up in a plastic bag. And so I've thrown up in a bag, and I'm holding this bag of throw up, and I'm like, I am so sorry. I had Guillain-Barré, a severe case of axonal Guillain-Barré syndrome, and I get car sick and dizzy now sometimes, but not always. I've traveled for hours today and I was fine. I'm so sorry. And it was so embarrassing because it's like, I wasn't going to tell the woman from the library group, like, no, you can't sit in the front. I have possibly worse car sickness than you. So the lesson of that story is you can be prepared and you can be professional, but you can't be perfect. I can't believe this is the advice of my story. Like, just throw up in a bag. Another thing that happened at that residency is that I had given a reading at the library, and I was told I could go out a back door of the library because it was the closest to getting to the writer's cottage. And there was some leftover wine, so one of the ladies from the library group had given me this leftover wine, and she was like, oh, if you go out the back, the cottage will be right there. They were like, don't worry about using the back door. They never have that alarm on. So I'm carrying this bottle of wine and I go out the back door and the loudest alarms go off. So I'm walking through the yard with this open bottle of wine. I'm wearing heels, so I almost fell over in heels in the mud with an open bottle of wine with the alarm blaring, making my way to the writer's cottage. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.